Today's podcast is brought to you by Progresso Talent Partners, who for more than 25 years have successfully delivered interim and permanent leadership talent to transform businesses. To hire the talent you need to enable your business to thrive, visit www.progressotalent.com today. David Ffoulkes-Jones is CEO and co-founder of Daizy, the open platform that enables enterprise to quickly build, deploy and scale Internet of Things applications. He's the former COO and now a non-exec director at OpenStage, the specialist fan engagement platform for the music industry, and previously had spent 16 years as CEO of WDS, growing a business at the forefront of the mobile-first revolution to more than 2,000 employees across the globe. So what's the story behind the story? Without further ado, let's get into it. David, hi, welcome to the Extrology podcast. Great to have you as our guest. I'm really looking forward to getting stuck into all things David Ffoulkes-Jones. But as is customary with the Extrology podcast, I'd like to start with those early days. So for the benefit of listeners, set the scene. Tell us, where did you grow up? What was childhood like for you?
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me, Lee. Yeah, good to be here. Childhood, born in Panama, Central America.
Wow.
That was, my dad was in the oil industry at the time and was posted out there. He was an accountant, and he was working for an oil company, and he got posted there and then went on to Canada. But eventually, after 2 years, so I can't remember, this is when I was obviously a baby, came back to the Northwest. So I say early childhood would have been just South Manchester and around there. Really good memories, great fun, very comfortable. Got 2 older sisters, and we had a lot of fun.
So no recollections of Panama, those
Unfortunately,
kind of early formative years, not shaped?
No. The story of my mother going into labour whilst there was a coup going on in Panama, because that was quite a regular occurrence apparently, getting police escort into the canal zone, which is, for those who don't know, that's a neutral territory. So it's, I think, America and Panama and obviously, and then a couple of other countries have rights over the canal zone itself. So I was born in a hospital there, which it was quite exciting apparently, but obviously completely oblivious to me. And then, so I mean, the earliest memories that I've really got are of Manchester and there, and just, it was a pretty, I was going to say normal, but in the sense of it was a very happy sort of place. Went to school.
What sort of things were you into as a kid?
I'm dyslexic, so I was not academic. The academia side of school was always a bit of a challenge, and as such, I remember my mother tearing into one of the, I think it was the headmaster at the time of one of the schools I was at, because she found my spelling test, of which I miraculously got 20 out of 20, and she went through it and said, "Well, none of these are right. Why? How did you score so well?" But at the time, we used to just swap papers with the guy sitting next to you. And we used to, obviously, I'd just mark all his right, he'd mark all mine right, and you just hand them in, and that's how you get away with things. But yeah, so academia was not something that came easy to me. But this was before you didn't get screened, if you like. There was no pre-qualification. Oh, you're dyslexic, you're just lazy, right? When in those days you're clearly intelligent. You need to work harder and focus up, and all those sort of things. So I just got bounced a bit from one school to another, and then to another, and then eventually ended up in boarding school boarding school at Oundle. Which I enjoyed massively as well, which was a great deal of fun. But that was all because it was just about, well, hang on a second, he's not achieving his potential. Why isn't he achieving his potential? Unfortunately, at that place, an Australian English teacher took me aside one day and said, has no one tested you for being dyslexic? Look, I think you're dyslexic. You should need to go away and have a test. which I did, and obviously it turned out that I was. And not that changed anything at school, because obviously they didn't know what to do. They just had a diagnosis, but there was no sort of additional support as a result. And you just muddle through. You just found a way of coping, which I think makes you quite resilient.
I was just going to say my question as to what perhaps you feel you gain from what I'm sure at times were really challenging circumstances, but that resilience you feel is something that is born out of it.
There's a couple of things I enjoyed. I got a lot out of sport, right? So I enjoyed team sport specifically. I put a great deal of emphasis on team play. It's not about whether you're good or bad. It's just whether you're able to communicate and get better and all that sort of stuff. And I do put a lot of emphasis on that. So I enjoyed that side of it. As a result of that, I built a friendship group. Having friends that I've kept in touch with for 50 years. It's I think that was my main benefit from being in any education environment, was the people that I met, and I learn a lot from conversation, from writing stuff down. Reading stuff is hard, but from just communicating with people and having the opportunity to ask questions and figure out the sort of questions I'm really interested in, and therefore the answers I really want to know, was a skill set I think I got quite early. And then being able to understand, well, who do I need around me to to make things work, get through the next whatever it happens to be, the next exam, the next business plan, the next whatever. I always relied on making sure that I had people that I could tap into, that I knew I could rely on, basically. So that created that sort of, I think those were the skill sets that I picked up quite early.
What sort of sports did you play?
So it's rugby and rowing,
right,
at school. And for my sins, still get on the ergo. In fact, just before coming here, I was on there. But it's quite a relentless sport, quite a mind-focusing sport, rowing. It's, again, I find these sort of things fascinating, because it's not about whether you're the quickest, the biggest, all the rest of that. Everyone's different. But what it is about is sitting down in an environment and saying, last time I did X, this time I'm going to see if I can do a bit better. Knowing inside yourself whether you've actually delivered, irrespective of the time, knowing that I feel like I've done a good job. I have this weird, which I'm not sure is normal. In fact, I'm pretty sure it probably isn't normal. But I talk to myself in the third person when I'm exercising. It's always like I'm trying to get myself out of my body and just see my body as a vehicle to execute the task.
Whilst you're rowing?
Yeah. So I'll say, "Oh, you did well today." Literally. It's not normal.
Well, I don't know. Respectfully, I don't know that I agree. I think that people have all sorts of coping mechanisms, is the word that springs to mind, but ways in which they will. Techniques that they will apply to get themselves through challenging circumstances, particularly in sport. I know I was reading something the other day about a lady who's an ultra runner, and she does a similar thing. She talks to herself in the third person. She's got a series of mantras that she chants while she's running.
Well, there you go. Yeah,
and just to get her through those difficult moments. And I think so.
If you see your body as a vehicle, it's all of a sudden the pain that you're going through doesn't at least. You can somehow compartmentalize it. You can say that's just your body starting to fail or whatever. It's reached its limit. That's fine. You just got to keep going. It'll be okay. You need to keep going. All that sort of stuff. I think it makes sense to the people that do it. I guess people who are on the outside listening think you're going mad, but it works.
One of the questions I was interested in, those sort of heroes, the posters on the wall as a kid you mentioned. I'm guessing you and I have a similar vintage. Would have been Red. I'm trying to think when Stephen
Pinson and Redgrave,
Pinson and Redgrave and Holmes and so it would have been what was it 88?
Yeah.
Was that the first Olympics?
Was that the no, the Athens
Barcelona was 92, wasn't it? I'm trying to remember.
I think they did win.
LA was 84. What was it 88? Was it Seoul? That rings a bell. I don't know. I can't remember. But so was Pinson? Was that part of a?
I didn't.
Or were you more interested in doing it yourself as opposed to watching?
So I tell you what. I tell you why I do admire the Olympians. I in terms of sports people, I admire people like that, because if you think of something, whether it's rowing or something else, any of those minority sports, the Olympics is like the peak of anything that they're going to do. And so they will go for probably 8 years trying to get into an Olympic team. And if you take it on something like, as I say, I know a little bit about the rowing stuff, that it comes down to, a 6-minute final after 4 years of going through a training cycle, and you've committed your whole life to this 6 minutes, and you might have a cold.
Was it different event? I think, was it Derek Redmond, that the 400-meter runner whose father with the hamstring pulled, his father jumped out the crowd. And I just think athletic sport, the embodiment of the very the human spirit and endeavour and the range of emotions through which you might go. I think it's phenomenal. It just captures everything. The Olympics in particular, because of the range of
You're not
sports.
doing it for money.
No. There's like a glory.
There's a purity about it.
That's
and I know that in some, obviously drugs have had an impact in more, probably more so when it was Eastern Europe and so on. But the purity of that, if I do have a cold, and the right thing for me is to take a step out of the boat and let somebody else come into the boat or come into the the relay team or whatever it happens to be, because that's the right thing to do. To do it because you're there for the team, you're there for, you want to win, you want the team to win. You've done everything that you can. I think it amazes me how people can commit to something like that, and the intensity of what they go through. It's just simply because they love what they're doing. I mean, on the one hand, it is very selfish. You have to be very selfish to get to those heights of elite performance. But on the other hand, they're not, it might come to nothing, but that's not the point. The point is, I'm going to give it my all, and I'm going to keep trying and see what happens.
The bit I'm intrigued by as well is, though, what next? That kind of the sense of purpose, the compelling sense of purpose, where you've got that, to your point, you're focused on that 6-minute final or whatever the analogy might be. And then when you go over that, when you cross that finish line.
Yeah, I've always found it interesting when sports people start doing the business books and the business, and they come in and talk to business, and you think, no, we're talking very different. I don't like Sir Clive Woodward. I won the World Cup. This is what I'm now going to talk to everyone about how to run a better business. And you think, no. The rules that you applied in getting England to a World Cup final do not apply in day-to-day business. It is all the time in business. There's not one event that you're going to excel at and then tick that box, I'm done. No, what are you going to do next year? What are you going to do the year after? What are you going to do? And also, how do you develop a team over a period of time? I can't just say, because you aren't achieving the metrics, I'm going to let someone else who is. I can't be as ruthless. So there are laws that prevent me doing that, even if I wanted to. But if I did, I'd potentially ruin a culture. And it's what's building up over an extended period of time in business that then gives this. And it's a great feeling when it starts to happen, when it almost gets outside of your control, because the momentum's built up that you've invested in and you've put in a lot of energy and you're getting it there. But suddenly it reaches that tipping point when it starts to go on its own, and off it goes. And your sort of your commitment to it, your energy, is not as relevant as it was before. But trying to get it to that point is exciting.
That's really interesting, because I oftentimes have reflected on the parallels between sport and business, and yet I've never quite thought of it the way you've just described, but it makes perfect sense. I'm then sat here thinking, is that therefore why someone like a Sir Alex Ferguson, who builds success upon success upon success over a 20-year period, is such an outlier, such a rarity that ever that should occur, because he's not focused on this. He's got multiple focuses, and it's not only this season's championship win, but it's the season after that, and the season after that, and the season after that. So he's building a performance over a sustained period of time is much harder than that one moment.
The job in sport you don't want or never wanted was who's replacing Sir Alex Ferguson, right? Because you're coming in, and suddenly the culture will change because you're the leader of that environment. But you're going from a winning, extreme performing culture to obviously there's still the goals and the targets are still the same. I still want you to win the Premiership. I still want you to be in the Champions League. But it's not Sir Alex Ferguson running it anymore. It's somebody else. And therefore that undoubtedly is going to, the change that goes through that organisation will undoubtedly have an impact, and did for whatever number of years. And now they seem to start to get it right now. But, that's all testament to the likes of Sir Alex Ferguson being able to do it in such a brutal environment for such a long period of time. But at the same time, that transition was never going to be easy, right?
No.
You're taking one superstar outlier, to your point, out of that environment, had control over just about everything in the football club, to then putting in a more modern structure that they put in today. Yeah, that's going to have an impact.
When did you first start to take an interest in technology? I appreciate that's an all-encompassing arena. But...
So I went after university. It was because I did go to university.
What did you study?
I studied hydrography and ocean science.
Interesting.
Well, that was because that was the only course that would have me, right? So it was literally, you've got to go to university. I don't know why. That was the mantra at those times. Oh, you've got to go. Did it really have a great deal of impact on me? I guess it ruled a few things out. I wasn't stood still. I was still going forward a bit in terms of my understanding of the world. There's some technology involved in positioning oil rigs and understanding how radio waves bounce off rock at the bottom of the sea and all that sort of stuff, and positioning systems. And so it was relatively technical in that sense, but not, as I said, it was really the only place that would have me. And then from there, I did learn that I wasn't ever going to do that.
It was the thing it ruled out.
Yeah, I thought, right, that's definitely not for me. And the reason being was when I researched, well, what sort of jobs can you go into? And I should have probably looked at this before taking the degree, but they seem quite limiting. You never saw somebody of this background with that degree running an environment. That didn't happen. They always became a team lead of a very subset group of specialists, but they never ended up running the oil rig or running the exploration or they never seemed to get to the top jobs. And I remember thinking, well, not that I necessarily wanted to run anything, but why would you limit yourself? So why would I go into a career path that seemingly didn't have an option to just keep going as far as you could? It didn't seem to make any sense to me. So I then had a chat with my sister, actually, my elder sister, Sian, and she said, well, she's very good at understanding, she can ask questions and get to the root of things. I said, what do you enjoy doing? And I thought, well, you're 20, whatever. You're thinking, I'm not sure. Well, going to the pub, I'm not sure you can make a living out of that. I thought troubleshooting, actually, I quite enjoy solving problems. And so her view was, well, become an account manager. Try and get into something where there's account management involved, where you are dealing with clients on a regular basis who are going to throw basically shit at you the whole time. Say, look, deal with that, give me answers. And I did. I joined a print company that was based in Chelmsford in Essex. So I moved there. It was a digital print business, and they did all the reprographic scanning imagery, all that sort of stuff. And then they opened a London office. I moved to London and ran the London office for them. And there was only about 24 at the time, and I was dealing with their clients. And that was brutal. I mean, that was proper hard work. That was, I don't know how many hours a day, 14 hours a day. I mean, you just worked and worked and worked because everything always came late. The printers always basically wouldn't shift deadlines. So we were the squeezed middle, if you like, of that scenario. And that taught me a lot of lessons there. And I got frustrated with it after a period of time because I could see that there was this thing called the internet coming down the track. So I went to the boss, the owner of the business, and I said, look, I think there's an opportunity here we're scanning all this imagery. Why don't we create a database of images that are accessible online? And then rather than us drop them in into the right places. They can do it themselves and just pass us the files, and then and he said no. And I thought, right, in which case I'm leaving, because I don't want to be stuck in a print business, because this isn't going to be around for much longer. Clearly it is around still, so I was wrong there, but I thought...
But not to the same extent. It would have been a dramatically different industry to the one that you would have been in those years ago.
Well, exactly. So that's when I thought, right, I that was the first time, coming back to your original question, when did you start thinking of technology? It was around about then, which would have been 97, 96, really started thinking about, okay, what does this all mean, this new stuff? And then at that point, I thought, I've really got to get out of the industry I am now. I want to move into something that was quicker growing and IT technically based. So I started sending out CVs and asking people, and I mean, we're talking 100 plus, trying to just get a job from anyone. And then through a mate's dad, he said, I know somebody who's just starting a business down in Poole. And that business was WDS, which I ended up running and growing and so on. As you want to have a chat with him, I thought, well, yeah, because no one else is having a chat with me. So I shuffled off down here from London and met with Hugh, who started the business. And that was my first proper foray into a technology-led business.
And from what I remember, WDS, you were right at the forefront. I mean, hindsight is a wonderful thing, but of the emergence of mobile technology and the integral part it was to become. I mean, today this seems like, to actually then make this observation in the world in which we find ourselves today seems a nonsense. But and I suspect to many a listener, almost difficult to understand. But my first proper job, I didn't even have a PC on my desk. No. You had a Rolodex and a phone, and you dialed 9 for an outside line. This concept. I think I remember my first my Motorola. It was a Motorola phone. I can't remember which one it was, but my first company mobile. But it wasn't. They weren't everywhere like they are today. No. We didn't live our lives through them. But WDS, as I recall, was really at the forefront.
I didn't have a phone. I didn't have a phone until until we started that business. Didn't have one.
What did it do? Remind us. What did it?
So what we did was, it was right when, so where we were was right on the advent of the digitization of the network. So before WDS, it was mostly analog network technology, and then we came in as it was changing to be digital. And what you could do is send data over the network, and data in those days was fax, and it was email on Lotus. No, in Lotus 123. So you think, well, so we're going back quite a long way, and the way that you did it was you had a little PC card or PCMCIA card, it looks like a credit card. You slot in the side of your computer. Your laptops were thick in those days, and they used to have these little ports that you could slap one of these cards in, and that connected to the bottom of your phone, and then that sent the data out, and the card acted as a modem. So you listeners, for those who aren't technical, may or may not remember the sort of screeching noises of when you used to try and connect to the internet or whatever when you were playing your computer games. Well, that's in essence what the modem was, the thing that was exchanging the screeches, and therefore handshaking its connection and all the rest of that sort of stuff. And what we did, what WDS did, was try to bridge the gap between what, in essence, if you think of Nokia as a mobile phone company who built the mobile phones, Motorola, Ericsson at the time, etc., and they were selling this card. Well, this card looked more like an IT product, a modem, than it was a cellular mobile phone. And the companies were saying, yeah, but I want to sell this through my cellular channel. Well, you were talking about people who selling phones who had no understanding of how a modem worked or how you inputted AT command sets to configure the data card correctly. They had no concept of that. So Nokia was saying, well, we don't really know how to support that channel for this IT product terribly well. So can you help us with that problem? And we said yes. And that's how, in essence, WDS started. We said, yeah, we can solve that problem for you. So we literally had 4 people sat on a desk answering phones.
And that business went from 4 people to the best part of 2,000, didn't it?
Yeah,
over
we were about 2,500
15-year
people.
period, something like that.
Yeah, well, we operated all over the world at the end. By the time we sold it, we were in our biggest markets were America, but we were in throughout Asia and Africa and Middle East and obviously Europe. So yeah, no, it's successful. We were lucky in terms of the timing. We didn't, when Nokia said, "Oh, do you want to look after this?" We said yes. We had no idea that data would be ruling our lives as it is today. I mean, there's nothing you do on your mobile phone that isn't data related now. And all that's happened is that PC card wasn't all that's happened. Technology has obviously gone along more than that. But in essence, that's just gone into the phone. And obviously then it became IP based, which you didn't need the circuit switch technology and this, that and the other. But so the technology has advanced. It's gotten easier. But then at the same time, the range of things that you can do has exploded. So we found ourselves in a really interesting position very early without really understanding why we were there, other than the fact that we just said yes. And I think that luck is an interesting. I've thought about this quite a bit when I listen to really successful entrepreneurs, and they say there's always an element of luck, right? That there's no way in my mind that somebody doesn't get lucky. Bill Gates got lucky. Now, the question is it luck or is it just being open and working hard? If you work hard, you'll get into the environments that present themselves. And that, I guess, is timing and a bit of luck. But you've also got to be open-minded enough to then say, actually, yeah, this is something worth doing, rather than, just keeping your head down and carrying on. So in that sense, we mastered our own destiny a little bit, but we had no idea that it was going to be as large as it was.
But also, I think that the thing that always strikes me that with I've worked with lots of entrepreneurs, lots of founders over the years. I think virtually all of whom have absolutely understood that in order that they might scale their business, at some point, at least intellectually, at some point you've got to let someone else play with the train set, right? So if you're going to scale, you've got to put a team around you, you've got to do all those kind of good things. Emotionally allowing that to happen is a very different dynamic.
Yeah.
And I think that if you look at what it took for 4 of you sitting around a table, answering phones, whatever, to go to 2,000 people and offices in Singapore and the US and South Africa, I remember all the places the footprint that you enjoyed, that takes a certain mindset and skill set and emotional capacity and intellect to enable that to happen. So to your point, yes, luck plays, but there's also a strategy and a skill to it that takes advantage of the luck that's afforded you.
Yeah, and in that, I mean, we were young, right? So I was 24 when I was running WES. Hugh was a year older than me, and Craig was another guy. And we were all the same age, right? So we were young and open to the fact that we were having a laugh, doing something that was quite enjoyable with people we enjoyed being with. But we weren't encumbered by any of the. We were very fortunate in the sense that Hugh's dad was the main investor into the business, and I've not really ever asked him this question, but he had no idea that it was going to become something as large as it did, and therefore, otherwise we probably would have been swapped out, to your point, and more experienced people put in. But what we knew, we were in an environment that encouraged people to have a go and, go for it. Like Hugh's dad was an entrepreneur. He was very used to taking risk and understanding that sometimes things fail and you've just got to get back up and on again and see what happens next time round. And as long as you're learning, you're going forward, right? It's all that sort of stuff. And we were growing quickly, but I think we were always asking questions of ourselves, I guess, was the main sort of culture that we had there, which was, if we can do it, surely other people are thinking about it. I mean, we're not the cleverest people in the room, right? So there's got to be other people. So what do we have to do next to make sure that we stay ahead of the other people that are clearly cleverer than us and already figured out what's going to happen next. So there was a sort of a healthy sense of paranoia, which was always driving us forward. So we didn't dwell on the successes of the day or the past or whatever. We said, well done and everything, but we didn't dwell on them because we were always thinking that just makes us more of a target. So what are we going to do next, and how do we move this thing forward? And part of that was this idea that you could operationalize what we did.
Right.
And that was quite a key focus area for me and for the team, was how can we remove ourselves? Because that's the ultimate, right? If you can remove yourself, you've got a massively scalable business. But how can you do that? How can you get the secret sauce of whatever it is that you've created? How can you get that into your operations on every decision that's being made? So we created something called a WDS way. It's difficult to say how successful it was, but it was our way of trying to figure out, well, we think if we can get people to focus on these type of things when they're making a decision, and that they can come back to these type of things for each decision they made, then we've got a way of measuring the success of decision-making in our business. Because it's not just about whether it was monetarily accretive or not. It's more about, did you follow our principles? Because if you did, then, and it went wrong, well, that's okay. But if you didn't follow our principles, then that's a problem. Because why did you end up doing what you did? So we were quite focused on that sort of stuff all the way through, I think. And we ended up, as I say, writing it down and trying to, make it our sort of DNA of our business. It was good fun. I mean, it was good fun. Tiring, but good fun.
What was fun about it?
It was just, we were in a great, I mean, you think about the industry, it was growing through it was, so, working in an industry that was growing at that pace in of itself was good fun, because the technology being launched all the time, we were right at the forefront of it. So we were seeing Apple product before anybody else got to look at it, because we were testing the devices into the networks. We were right at the forefront of machine learning and artificial intelligence, and trying to create things that are common-based now, chatbots. We were doing 8 years ago, 10 years ago. And all the time we were forcing the business to think of ways of almost cannibalizing itself. Today you're doing it over the phone. Tomorrow that's clearly not going to happen. It still is, obviously, but that was our mindset. Clearly no one's going to ring anybody up anymore. What's the point in that? So in which case, how do they access the knowledge they need to access to get things up and running as quickly as possible? So it was always that very clear focus of, there's got to be a better way. There's always got to be a better way. And if we don't find it, someone else will. And if they find it before us, we're toast. So let's find it first and capture that market. That was successful to a degree, but also that's dangerous as well, because that might mean that you don't execute on your day-to-day well enough, because you're always looking for something else. And I know that a number of my colleagues would accuse me of not focusing enough on today. But that was the way I'm sort of wired, is always about, well, there's got to be better than this. So what is it?
But you had, as I recall, you had a strong leadership group around you when you got to that size and scale, that you had that, COO focused on daily operations. So your role as CEO becomes more about, well, what does the future look like, and how do we keep driving towards it so we don't stand still, because we're in such a fast-moving world. The minute if we just pause, people are just going to start running past us.
Yeah, and I guess coming back to the dyslexia thing and the resilience, and trying to figure out, well, I need people around me that I can talk to understand stuff quicker, rather than reading through things. And it's much easier for me just to sit on a phone call and hear what the end customer is saying to one of our care reps and do that 100 times than actually spend any time looking at any, that makes more sense to me. And I can filter through what the inconsistencies are in the conversation and get to the sort of the nub of the root cause of any of the challenges that the end customer is facing. And having that team around you that has strengths where clearly I didn't. So I'm not a process person. I'm awful when it comes to just follow this, do this every Monday, do this every Tuesday, or whatever it is. I don't know whether I've often thought, well, it's just you being lazy and using things as an excuse, but it just doesn't come naturally to me. Whereas business people need that, so getting somebody in who does that, and our operations guys who would just be brilliant at, this is what I need to see every day. Every day I need to see this. And I want to see it because it talks to the quality of the delivery that we're doing. It talks to all, brilliant. Get people in to do that for me. I'm not going to be doing it myself. It was that sort of mindset. Craig, who was in the business right at the beginning and with us all the way through, he had a brilliant mind whereby I could just go into his room and talk to him, draw lots of stuff up on the whiteboard, which was, to all intents and purposes, gobbledygook. I'd just be thinking about if we could interpret data differently, if we could, whatever it was. And then he would then take that and make it a million times better than anything that I would have come up on my own, and communicate it as new product and propositions into the market. So, finding those people is really, it was critical to the success of the company.
How was leaving? I mean, it was such a 16 years of, it's a huge part of your life, right? Well, I mean, the reality is we spend more time doing this thing we call work. Yeah, and more time with the people we choose to work with than arguably those we've chosen to spend our lives with. I mean, that's the reality for most people. Yeah. You take that out, that's even if it's over a long period of time and you've got a chance to come to get to grips with it, it's still I'd imagine quite a wrench when you leave.
Yeah, I wouldn't have sold the business. I wasn't the majority shareholder, and Jeff, whose dad I mentioned before, he had clear reasons too, and that was fair. And he said, "Look, I'm going to sell it. I don't mind who you pick. You go out and sell the business for me." So he was very good on that front. But I was still clear that there was more to be done. Yeah, but that I probably would never change, right? So, and that was his point to me. He said, "Look, that's I'll come back in a year and you'll keep telling me there's more to do." So we are going to sell it, and then we picked a company that we felt would add massively into the future development of the business. So the R&D side of the company, which was all around AI and machine learning. And that was Xerox, because they own Palo Alto Research, which is the home of the internet and everything IT related. And the guy who was sponsoring, if you like, the deal, a chap called Luca Maestri, who's now CFO at Apple, he said, "Look, I want to buy you because you're disrupting our traditional business model, and we spend a lot of money on research. And I want to put you between Park and our operational business. So we need you to operationalize what's coming out of our research and development." And that's pretty cool, because they're spending $1 billion a year in R&D, and they had some fantastic patents already in the space of machine learning, in both in terms of understanding and generation of language, which is a key part of artificial intelligence. It's one thing trying to get to an answer. It's the other, how do you interpret a question such that a computer can answer that question, because you've got to break it down, get the syntax out of it, and then that's the understanding of the question. Then you've got to, okay, once I've broken it down and I can get the answer to the question, I've then got to present it back in a way that someone's going to understand it again. And so those two, understanding and generation of language, were really, really important for artificial intelligence. And they were, quite advanced in that area. So we thought, well, this is a good match for us. And we sold to them.
Which strikes me with the benefit. I mean, if you look at where we are today, where ChatGPT is all the talk of the day, and when we've come with AI and machine learning and all these things, and for context, timescales, what would this have been, 10
12,
years?
Yeah,
12 years ago?
Yeah.
Goodness me.
So that's when we sold it, yeah.
Quite visionary.
Yeah, we
know this is the way the world is going.
Yeah, we were,
very visionary.
Little company in Poole, right?
Master of understatement here.
I mean, it was so fascinating. So there's a logical progression of what we were doing. So it was visionary in one sense, but also, if you have that mindset of, well, clearly it's not going to be the same in a year's time. So what does that look like? And then what does that look like? And so on. And, I guess that leads to, well, it's going to be all automated. So the question then is, how do we automate what we are doing entirely? And then there's some big problems to solve there, and you need some big brains on those problems. And these guys presented that opportunity. So we sold to them in 2012. Unfortunately, Luca, fortunately for him, unfortunately for me, after about a year and a half, he left to Apple. And then that became difficult because the new CFO had a different view on how things were going to be done. And I was the guy. I likened it to. It's good. I had good. I used to talk to the board at Xerox, and I'd say to them, "Look, it's your company now." It changed beyond recognition. Really, I was a very focused environment, so it's up to them. Obviously, they own it. It's up to them what they want to do. But one thing that I kept saying to them, one thing you can't do is what you're doing today, because what you're doing today is you're putting me in 747 with all the rest of you. And my job is to go out on the wings and change the engines, right? So everybody...
Whilst you're flying it.
Whilst we're flying.
10,000 feet,
everybody around me thinks I'm a terrorist because I'm bringing the plane down.
Yeah.
And nobody is going to support that because everything I do is fundamentally threatening their livelihood. So why don't you get me off the plane and put me on a different transport? Put me in on a rocket launch pad, and it might blow up. In which case, I'm a goner. But it might take off and might be successful. But where it became very difficult is that they were driving that innovation through their operational business, and their operational business had no intention of change. And they took on board a lot of the marketing messages that we put out there with them in terms of how they should evolve their business models, but they were very, very slow to adopt any of the technological changes that would underpin that and make them truly different to anything in the marketplace. And I found that I found very, very difficult to deal with. And it wasn't a great year, I guess, of my life. And then I left. I thought I just can't see this anymore. It was tough. That was tough, actually.
And had you a plan? Had you had that thought? It sounds as though what you're describing, the journey that you were on, it was all consuming, I'd imagine. That to then actually think, well, what next?
No, I didn't have any plan.
That in itself is going to take up a lot of bandwidth. So was there a plan?
No, there wasn't really. It just became to that point where you thought, no, I can't. I'm not. This isn't healthy for me. I was not in a good headspace at all, because every conversation became a negative. And that wasn't their fault. This is my issue. It wasn't their issue. If that makes sense, they were doing what they thought was the right thing to do. I just totally disagreed with them. I could, and therefore everything they said I would disagree with almost, because it didn't stack up. It wasn't where I wanted to, this was what we said we were going to do, and we are not moving in that direction. You're getting me to go over here, which might be what you want to do, but I want to do this, and this is what you told me that we were going to be doing. It was that sort of stuff. And then American corporates, they have a way about them that is, in my view, entirely wrong. Quarterly earnings mean a lot to them, they're reporting those quarterly earnings and I think it engenders a very short-term view of their business. Xerox business was a challenging business to be in. It was basically printers, copiers, paper based. Well, that isn't a strong business line to be in. It's not. It was changing and needed to change. They bought a massive services company to make it move into a different direction in terms of information management more than the actual physical stuff, which made sense, right? At a high level, that sort of makes sense. And then we were part of that part of that transitioning of, if we're going to move in this direction, we need to move with a differentiated proposition that allows us to be, market leading and all that sort of stuff. But what they were doing was still just very much, arbitrage on employment costs. As I can go to Vietnam and get it done, half price of India or whatever, and that's just a race to the bottom as far as I was concerned. That didn't interest me at all. It's
almost coming back to, it strikes me, the sporting analogy the discussion we were having, and the quarterly reporting model is almost akin to the sports team or the one event in time.
Yeah.
So you're running to a finisher line,
Yeah.
and then you're running again to a finish. It's a series of short, sharp bursts. It's a sprint, as opposed to the Ferguson model of building that legacy over a sustained period.
Yeah.
They're not worried about that because it all depends on what is it that you're doing today that will affect today's outcome. And at the very best, the forward visibility we're going to get is 3 months hence. That's all we really need to satisfy the stakeholders that are really going to drive, satisfaction for all concerned. Yeah. It's that 3-month window. We just got to run hard for 3 months. It's a very simplistic way of looking at quarterly reporting, but
it leads to different behaviours, right? As you say, we're sprinting rather than and also if there are mechanisms to get to those earnings. If there are mechanisms to get to those earnings in terms of we've now experienced furlough because of COVID, but that probably wasn't a phrase that people in the UK would have heard of very much. In America, it's not an uncommon practice whereby I need to hit my earnings, so you will furlough your staff for 2 weeks so I can get them off the payroll, and as a result of that, I'll hit my earnings. And I was being asked to do this, and I point blank refused to do it because. You were asking me, so our headquarters was in Seattle. You're asking me to furlough experts in artificial intelligence and machine learning in Seattle. Have you any idea, whether, they're
not coming back anytime soon, are they?
So yeah, it was those sort of things. You just think you are not thinking this through. You are literally just see everything as a nail, and you've got a hammer, and bang, there you go, have that. And I think there are benefits of targets, definitely in terms of focus, but when it gets to that level of extreme, it's not healthy. It becomes a toxic environment, and I think that was a big part of the cultural challenge that Xerox faced, and I think they're coming through it now. But I left anyway.
I have a really good pal of mine who once in the depth of conversations probably best prefaced by the knowledge that, or at least a disclosure that it was fueled by alcohol.
Yeah.
But he was his business, or he was doing business in both the US and Asia, China in particular. This is going back some time. And we just were having a conversation about how he was finding the differences between the two. And the basic premise of his argument was that he said, everything in America, everything with my US customers is really about what is it that you're doing now that will affect today's result or this month's result or this quarter's result. But it's all now. Whereas the Chinese question seems to be, what does this look like for our grandchildren? And he said, I know that. So they're literally polar opposites. One is all about today, one's all about that. So his view was China is thinking in dynasties and we're thinking in quarters.
Yeah.
And actually at some point, there's probably a balance somewhere in the middle, which is there's a sensible argument to both. But I wonder if the world is being, if we look at the way the world is now, we're forever it strikes me being pulled from east to west, constantly from east to west. And there's, But increasingly that sphere of influence is becoming ever more Eastern, that some of those business principles will start to permeate into some of our working practices that we might see here in somewhere like the UK. I don't know. I think that's an interesting. You lived with WDS. You had that footprint, didn't you?
Yeah. But so there's definitely differences. I used to think that the difference between the US and the UK is the UK will say yes, but they have no real understanding of what they've said yes to. Whereas the US, you'd spend a lot of time getting a real clarity of, to your point, how is this impacting my business? So that when they say yes, bang, it's gone. You are scaling at pace. So the US market for us was fantastic because it took us a bit of time to get to sell in because you were trying to get all the processes and tick all the boxes of all the stakeholders, all of that sort of stuff. But once you got an agreement, it scaled because they were committed. Whereas in UK, Europe, more generally, you go and have a chat and they'll say, oh yeah, this makes sense, we'll sign that off. And then you've got to sell even more to try and convince people that what they've done is a good thing. And you think, well, surely that should have come before you actually signed it off. Where I found Asia challenging as a new entrant to the market was just that trust. We had to be there for at least 2 years before people actually thought that we were worthy of even having a conversation. We'd we'd be going there. We had an office in Singapore, and we'd be going there and traveling around and seeing everybody, knocking on the door. And we had amazing references. I mean, we were dealing with everybody in the mobile industry. We would do, any device that even today, you pick up any Android device and there's WDS technology within it. So we were a credible business in our field. In fact, we were the leaders in our field, I would go as far to say. And yet we would still be viewed as, this sort of startup type organization that didn't really know what it was like here. And are you really solving problems? And you think, well, it's the same technology, everything's the same. So you have the same problems that everybody else has. Whether you choose to accept that you do or not is another thing, but let's keep banging on that door. And eventually we got in, but it took a long time. But as I say, it wasn't so much, it was not necessarily a technology challenge and a technology sale that we were doing. It was just simply, showing face and just being there. They wanted to know that they were dealing with a partner and that partner was, a person that they trusted and respected and that wasn't going to change overnight and all that sort of stuff. It took a long time, but ultimately we were successful in those markets, and the growth of mobile technology in China was huge, and we had China Unicom at the time as a big customer of ours, and they were the largest network operator in the world. So it was a good bit of business for us in the end, but it took years to get there.
There's a theme of kind of, I hate to categorize, David, but a theme of kind of riding. What's the next thing? What's the next stage of the way the world is evolving through technological innovation? We've talked about data and artificial intelligence and the journey of WDS. The next of which brings me on to Daizy and the Internet of Things, which is, I'm going to use the question for the sake of listeners, which basically means for my purposes, because I'm not smart enough to work this one out. How do you define what is the Internet of Things?
That's you could say anything connected to the internet is on the Internet of Things, right? You could put it as broad as that. So my definition of it is I would remove things like laptops and mobile phones, and I'd be looking at sort of inanimate objects that are assets that people have in their homes, whether it be you could have in their homes or in business, whether it be a dishwasher, a fridge, an Alexa, any of these things that are sort of there. That obviously isn't dumb, but any of these assets that are there, that if they could talk, if you just think about the concept of if something could talk, what would you find interesting for it to say? So if a dishwasher could talk, the interesting things it could say is, my drum is worn out, my belt needs replacing, my, it's empty, it's full, it's done, it's, all of these things might be interesting. Then you've got to figure out, okay, if you wanted to make that happen, so if you wanted it to talk to a maintenance team about the maintenance requirements, automotives, for example, that's a big line of business, obviously, in the Internet of Things. What is the return on making that happen? So does it mean that if I had a smart dishwasher and I knew when it was required servicing, would it make a better user experience in some way that someone might pay a bit more? Would it lower the cost because we'd be more efficient in our parts and our stock storage and this, that, and the other? Would it make us more aware of how we built the product so that we could build it better next time? You have to then build the business case behind it. So assume that you can get anything to talk. That's done, right? Because the internet is pervasive, it's everywhere, it's Wi-Fi, it's a wide area networked, it's all sorts of different bearer services and protocols are out there. So you can get any, and there's any number of different types of sensors out there. So assume anything can talk. The question is, as I said, what do you want it to say? The answer to that is, well, what's valuable? And if it's valuable enough for me to know that, I don't know, there's the part needs replacing, then shove a little sensor in there and it'll tell you that the part needs replacing. So that's at the very large everything scale. What we focus on at Daizy is specifically around LP WAN, basically low-powered wide area networking. So that's little sensors that you can deploy that are very low powered, so therefore they don't have to be plugged into an energy grid. You can literally put a battery in them and they'll last for up to 10 years. And they'll just chirp every so often a bit of information. So an example might be, just looking around here to see if I can think of something off the top of my head. So you want to know whether this room is occupied. So just put a little PRI sensor in there, a little infrared thing that will just tell you whether the room is occupied or whether this chair is being sat on. And that information might be interesting to a facilities manager. Is this room getting used very often? So therefore, do I need to rent it? Or for someone who owns who handles facilities for a global organization, it's quite useful to know how, especially now after COVID, for example, when offices are changing, how much real estate do we actually have that's getting used against how much that isn't? And can we do something with the stuff that isn't getting used? So that sort of, you can deploy that. You don't need it talking all the time. You just need to know certain information at certain points in time. And you deploy that and it will cost you, the sensor will cost you 50 quid. The connectivity on the network will cost you anywhere between 3 and 6 quid a year. And therefore, very low cost, very simple to deploy because of the platform Daizy that we created was all about, well, let's make things really easy for people. Literally anybody could go up and install one of these things, have it talking and get the data out of it very quickly. And that's what our platform does. And it manages all the connections. It manages the configuration of the device. It manages the data coming off the device so it's human readable. And rather than it just blurting information, it actually provides context. So it's the chair that Lee sat on in this room that's being used. It's not just any old chair anywhere, but it's got context attached to it, which makes it easier then for applications to consume that data and get the value back out of it. And that's what we do. So we're a subset, if you like, of IoT, very low cost, low power, wide area networked, and mostly targeted at enterprise.
Yeah, but multiple applications, arguably.
Huge number of applications. Just an infinite number.
Yeah, my head is going 10. My mind is whirring as to all the possibilities.
Yeah, we're doing something around cold storage at the moment. So health and safety for pubs and hospitality sector. Obviously they have all sorts of health and safety requirements. Well, do you want your chef running around the loos to make sure that they've been cleaned regularly? Or do you want them turning taps on and off to make sure that Legionella isn't a problem? Do you want them monitoring temperature in the fridge every so often just so that they can say that the food hasn't been contaminated? Clearly this is all required, but if you can get a sensor to do it and then it alerts you when it isn't happening, isn't that a better, cheaper, more cost-effective way of operating? And so that's an example of one of the things we're involved in at the moment. But it's smart meters for energy, and so on and so forth. There's just an infinite number of things that are out there that will connect to these networks going forward.
So what is it that you set out to achieve with Daizy?
So it's to solve a problem, and the problem is quite simple, that the technology is great, right? So that the networks perform well, they're filling in all the time, so they're becoming more and more pervasive in terms of its coverage. The range of sensors is huge, so and the cost is coming down. The battery. So you think, well, why isn't this exploding? It's so obvious that you would. There's some tragic stories about, I think it was in the press not so long ago, about a boy dying of respiratory challenges because they live in a social housing and the social housing had damp and mold and all the rest of that. Well, put a temperature humidity sensor in there. Then whether the property is, you can convert that data into information around whether the property's open to damp and mold, and then you can survey those properties better. Whether the heating's right, or fuel poverty is another big challenge. Well, again, if you have the data, you'll be able to know whether someone can afford the heating. If they can't afford the heating, it's going to lead to other challenges in your property and also health concerns for the people inside it. So there's all that. It's just but why wasn't it happening? So when you break it down, there's a number of things that I think were missing. One is that no one had actually considered how the supply chain was structured and how it was going to scale. So you have a network, you have a device, and you have an application that turns data into something, and then you have the client. And the client already has business support systems running in their environment, right? So they already have a work scheduling platform. They'll have a finance platform. They'll have an asset management platform. They'll have all of these things already existing in their environment. When I looked at this sort of supply chain, I'm thinking, okay, so how easy is it to deploy one of those devices? Well, actually, not that easy. You need somebody who knows what they're doing. You have to log into a network operator's back-end billing system, and you have to say, right, I'm going to attach this SIM to that device ID, and then that data I'm going to have to do, and it's all that sort of stuff. You think no one's going to do that.
Yeah. I
need a Sparky or a plumber I don't need an IT expert out in the field. I can't afford that. That isn't going to happen. So how can we deploy this really simply? And it needs to be any type of device. It can't just be, we'll deploy, if you only deploy this temperature and humidity device, then we're okay. No, it needs to be any temperature and humidity device. And what's more, each time that device talks, it sends out a bit of hex code. And the hex code is like gobbledygook, AX92EF, right? And that's supposed to tell you the temperature that it's just reported. Well, you've got to convert that hex code into something human readable. Otherwise, no one's going to. But each device will report things in a different way. So it's not once I've cracked one code, I've done them all. No, if this device is built by somebody else, it's just going to communicate in a different language. So you need to build, parsers, if you like. So you need to normalize that data and have a little bit of code that will normalize that data for every one of the devices that gets used out there, such that when it comes out, it's human readable. But also, that's not enough either, because I've deployed this now in a situation, and in order for the application to make sense of it, it's not good enough that it just knows that the fact that the temperature has changed. It needs to know which building the device was in and what floor and so on and so on. Otherwise, I'm still none the wiser as to. So that's all around project management and deployment of the IT device. So someone is at some point going to say, I need to deploy 500 of these things, and these are the buildings they're going to go into, and they're going to go into the bathroom of each of these buildings, and so on. And I'm going to get Fred to do that, Jane can do that one, and so on. I'm going to issue out the tasks. Well, if you have that information in some sort of project management capacity, you can then apply that to the context of the data coming off it. I know who's deployed it. I know where they deployed it. I know when it was deployed. I know the configuration. In other words, how many times I wanted it to talk. I can apply all of this then technically to the device. I can connect it to the network. I can do all of that in one environment. I don't need to have someone coming into multiple environments. And then I'll just publish the data into the application to do whatever transformation the application needs to do. So it needs to turn it from temperature and humidity data to damp and mold information. And then it needs to go into some sort of work scheduling system or something that the end customer is using. So we built a platform that allows that to happen. So you can scale the supply chain without worrying that you've got to know all of the different components of the supply chain, because we handle that. You just come in through our API and through our system, and we handle the complexity of the supply chain for you. So that's what we did.
Coming back to your point around the possibilities for which are endless, right? The application for which is never ending. I bring it back to all this the talk at the moment around machine learning, and let's be really foolish and play around a bit. The kind of the Terminator view of the world that we hand everything over to the machines.
Yeah.
But increasingly, it strikes me that as machines become ever more sophisticated, I was listening to something this morning that was talking about machines being able to create art really specifically in the style of a particular artist. So like a Jackson Pollock, whatever it might be, Picasso, whatever it might be. But that increasingly, so wouldn't arguably be considered as valuable as the human creation, but actually it's art. It's still art. It's still something we look at. You can still put it on a wall. Where does it all end? I mean, it strikes me. I find it fascinating because I don't find it frightening. I suspect there are some people that might
Well,
do if they're
if you're
kind of
an
doomsday.
artist.
Yeah. But then you can draw that into any kind of creative. You know, ad copy, speech. You know, the point on the it was a podcast I was listening to, but the point around speech. So if you're narrating for a book, so you get paid as a narrator for a book for an audio book. You need to do it once, right? So if it's a book of countless words, you've done all the words with that one reading. Yeah. They don't need you for the second, the third, and the fourth book. So what does all this mean? I mean, this is a kind of big picture stuff. All this mean for employment, I guess, and our place in the world. It's I suspect not something I'll have to wrestle with. It might be for future generations, but it's coming down the pipe.
I think with IoT specifically, or at least the stuff that we're dealing with, I think it's that there are huge productivity gains to be had by using sensors in the right way.
And huge efficiency gains as a consequence.
So if you look at the challenges the UK economy faces at the moment, it's high rates of employment, high rates of inflation. So it's really difficult to keep hold of staff. And if you're in an industry where I really need somebody to be doing a fairly menial task, so something that happens again and again and again. I mentioned a few in terms of compliance, for example. I need someone to go round all the taps, turn them on, measure the temperature, turn them off again, make sure it's run for a minute, blah blah blah, all that sort of stuff. That's a waste of a resource. Is the way that I would see it. Now I can get a sensor to do that. You probably don't. I need at some point somebody to turn the tap on and off, but it's probably being turned on and off enough during the course of any one given day, let alone a month, which is the time frame required. In Scotland now it's gone to 2 weeks, but you can measure that and then become much more productive with your resource. I don't think that means at any point that resource won't be used elsewhere within an organisation, because those organisations tend to be really strapped for people anyway.
Yeah.
So I think there's and the
productivity gains, to your point, which are a massive issue for the UK economy anyway, and have been.
The only way you solve that equation, which is high employment, high inflation, and therefore you think, well, how do I become better as a business when I'm given less money to operate in, because my budgets aren't increasing at the rates of inflation? So how am I going to be better? Well, you've got to be more productive.
Yeah.
And technology is kind of the only answer. I was chatting to someone the other day, and I said, how's it going? And they run a technology business, and he said, well, put it this way, at least I'm not having to sell technology as being an answer anymore. At least people know that the only way I answer this problem is through the use of technology and digitization and so on. And
how do you keep pace with it? Because is it Moore's law that processing power alone doubles every 18 months or whatever it is? How do you? You're in it. You're at the forefront of it. How do you even?
Well, I think this is for me. It's all I try and read as much as I can. Although, as I said, that's not a simple thing for me to do. I talk to a lot of people who are in influential positions and that I've met over the years. But also, I think there's some general principles as well that I just keep true to, which is I assume anything can be done. That's the first principle, and then just leave those problems for clever people to figure out. No, on a serious note, I do believe that most things can now be solved using technology. Now, whether it's the right thing to do, that I think that's a really interesting conversation. But certainly in the areas of process automation, which is kind of a specialist sort of area for me. I think I can automate most processes, or not me personally, but we can automate most processes. So the question then is, what is the value of doing that? And sometimes it's marginal gains. So, I think the human doing the process is. I'll give you an example. Actually, a better way of running through this. So, if I'm sending people into people's homes as a carer, is it good use of that carer's time to be asking somebody whether they've had a bath, whether they've eaten, whether they've, all of those sort of, because when the carers go into those homes, they have a set number of questions that they have to get through.
From a compliance point of view for health.
Because they're trying to figure out whether the person is healthy or not, and whether they might have dementia or any number of other things, right? So they, and good personal hygiene. Have they slept well? Did they, right? So you're asking somebody old a number of these questions, and frankly, they might not know the answers, but they will say whatever it is that they want to say. And they've got 15 to 20 minutes before they have to stop that particular appointment, and they've got to then drive on to the next one. And they'll have X number of these a day. So is that 15 minutes long enough? Probably not, right? It's definitely not if the first 5 minutes of it is taken up asking questions that you should probably know the answer to before you even got to the door. Now, in my mind, this is where technology really blends really well with the human, which is, if I can enhance the quality of the conversation that you're having with the person that you're going to see, because you already know that they got up 3 times in the night, you know that they haven't been to the loo, which means they're probably dehydrated. They haven't opened the fridge for the last 24 hours, which probably means they haven't eaten and the oven hasn't been turned on. If I know all of this stuff, I'm on to the next question then. And that next question is about their own health and their mental health or their physical health or whatever it happens to be. And it becomes a much more fulfilling, appointment and relationship that's being developed that already is stretched in terms of the amount of time that they're allowed anyway, because they've got so many of these appointments they've got to hit in any given time.
And you're making choices about the provision of care. You might afford that individual based on factual, measurable data, quantifiable data sources.
Exactly. And so they take that advance to that. So I think about obviously the stresses on the NHS and so on is another thing that everyone I'm sure thinks about at times, and how does that, how can that play out? Well, again, you've got a limited amount of resource and everybody is working really hard. So the answer here isn't, well, just get people to work harder, pay them more, might be pay them more money, but I'll pay you more money if you work harder. I'm already working at 120%. I can't work harder. So it doesn't, I would like more money, but I can't give you any more back for it. Okay. So how do we then say, well, we have to become more productive. We have to become more productive. Is there a way that technology enhances that relationship between the experts and the patient? Can technology be used to either be a frontline triage for the experts then to take over when the triage process has gone as far as it can go? Is that a possibility? I think it would be, based on some of the technology that I'm aware of and have used in the past. But whether it actually applies in that particular, I couldn't tell you. I know Babylon, for example, is a medical business using AI and very specifically looking to use it in the GP environment. I also know a lot of the reports and research that are done on people sharing confidential information. It's not what people think. A lot of the time, people are more comfortable talking to a robot in that sense because they're not being judged by the robot, and they recognise that they're not being judged by the robot, so they're happy to share whatever it is that they want to the robot. Whereas a person, it becomes a little more awkward potentially. It's being surgical, using the medical, extending the medical analogy. It's being surgical, using technology in a surgical way that helps and adds value, and the understanding of what value is really important. So, really getting to the nub of, is it just pure productivity improvement? Is it a customer experience benefit? Is it a speed? Is it, there's any number of things that can add into that value statement, but you've really got to be clear about why, what the value is that you're creating.
What advances in technology are you really excited by? AI
is really interesting to me, and where it's going. Obviously people have seen the ChatGPT stuff, and that's with the technology that they've got underpinning it is amazing how quickly. I am concerned as well at the same time, in terms of AI is always driven by the amount of data that you can feed into a system. And the more data you get, the better the algorithms perform, the better that the learning becomes, the more informed the AI is. And I think there needs to be ways that access to that data is more open. That leads to all sorts of security and privacy challenges and so on. But I think if it's captured, it's another one of these markets where someone can get such a lead so early on that everybody else is out the race before it's even started. Everybody, which you could argue, well, that's free markets and that's great. But I guess the older I've got, I guess the more that I'm saying, the more that I've thought, well, government at points does need to intervene and say, yeah, but for the interest of a competitive marketplace, we do have to allow other companies to join in. And if one company gets such a massive lead early on, then we're not going to have a great choice of capability out there. And I think that would be a shame. But it does excite me in terms of the potential of it, as well as, I mean, it's like everything, isn't it? I mean, there's always two sides of it. The point that you made a while back as well, which is, what do we do? I mean, I listened to, one of the VCs or private equity guys in California talking about the fact that, everything was going to be automated. Humans can just hang around and do. I think no, humans need purpose.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
that's more what I was driving at.
You can't.
It's not necessarily how do we live, in terms of how do we feed, how do we earn the money to feed, have our basic human needs. It was more about purpose, about what do we do?
Yeah.
Because we need a reason to get out of bed in the morning, right?
Yeah, and just playing tennis or whatever, that's all right if you're Djokovic and you earn a living from it, but that's why he does it.
Yeah,
he enjoys it, obviously, but he's doing it because that's his vocation. And I think people need to feel that. They need to feel like they've done a good job. They need to feel like they're valued in some way.
There's a sense of contribution. That's why that people want to feel they're contributing to something in some way.
What was one of the hardest things leaving when I stopped at WDS. And I left Xerox, and that was one of the hardest things to get my head around, was that no one is saying, well, no one's giving me a validation that what you did today was worth doing. It's like you think, oh, I've got to do something, because otherwise I won't get that validation, which is actually you've helped someone, you've delivered something of some value to somebody, and that's quite important, I think, for me, it's very important. I've now realised, but for people generally, I think it is important.
So what does success mean to you?
I get a lot out of seeing things that I'm involved in being used and adding, coming back to this word value. It doesn't have to be the only thing in the world that's doing it. It doesn't have to be the biggest thing in the world that's doing it. But the fact that what we've touched, what I've been involved in a team that's delivered something and people are now valuing it, I think that gives a really good feeling and it is very exciting. Now, obviously, all the stuff that I'm involved in, I hope go on to become world leading businesses. But the success in my mind is about that sort of customer, that customer saying, yeah, this is good. I mean, it's that validation again, I guess. And yeah, it's such a good feeling when somebody has because to get to that point that the customer says this is good, it's probably 2 years in the making, doing something that we're doing. And a lot of the time you're guessing, yes, you've got knowledge and experience and all of those things, but you've tried to analyze the problem 23 billion different ways, to try and really understand the problem that you're solving. But at the end of the day, until someone says, yeah, that's right, that solves a massive headache for us, you don't know whether it will. And that feels really good. Then for Daizy is slightly different to WDS, and I'm in another company, OpenStage, as well as a more of an advisor. Daizy and OpenStage are interesting because they're about creating markets. It's that they're the first in these markets, and the challenges that they face in terms of, right, great, you've got one company saying, yeah, that's right, you're onto something here. Now, okay, but in order to exist and stay alive, I need 50 of you guys saying that. So how am I going to go from 1 to 50? I want to go 50 to 100 and so on. And that's a problem that just needs to be solved. And I enjoy solving those problems, and just learning and keeping moving forward. And I don't think that is ever going to change.
Who's been the greatest influence on your career, do you think, and why?
Well, my mum and dad, it sounds a bit, I guess that might be a bit corny, but people that I know, my mum and dad and friends and my sisters and so on, the people that I know are in, rather than, if I could, I'm sure you could say, Branson or
the usual suspects.
I don't know what they've done. I know what they've done.
Yeah.
In the sense of I can see their businesses. I don't know how they did it. I've never spoken to them. I don't know them personally. I don't know what they went through to get to where they are. Whereas the people that I know that have been successful, I've got friends who've been tremendously successful, and that's a real inspiration to me that they are able to do, that they've been able to do what they've done. And I learn a massive amount from talking with them. My mum and dad, my mum started a secondhand clothes agency when I was I guess I would have been 8-9 years. Wasn't great in terms of receiving underpants in a brown paper bag that you clearly knew were secondhand. That side wasn't so good, but just seeing that, you can go out and you can do this sort of stuff. And then and dad, in terms of the career that he had, I saw how hard and how diligently he had to work at achieving the results that he was able to achieve. And as I said, my sisters, in terms of what they've achieved in their lives as well. And because I know the story, I know the detail of it, I know therefore the challenges and the opportunities and whether they took them, didn't take, all that sort of stuff. I get all that back stuff, and yeah, and as a result, I guess it's no great surprise. Daizy, there's myself and a really possibly my oldest friend. We're both invested into that company. We both work together on it, and he's really, really good fun to work with. I've invested in other companies with him as well, because he's just an incredibly bright and talented individual. And you just think, okay, I like, and in Daizy, we have 6 people plus Phil and myself, and all of those six people I've worked with before or have got to know prior to starting Daizy. And just incredibly good people to work with, and just incredibly inspirational as a result of that. I mean, I know that they are better than me at everything that they do, which I find amazing.
Yeah.
Not because I'm so good. It's just that I can go, have you thought about this? And invariably it's yes. And by the way, you've asked the wrong question. Brilliant. What's the right question to ask, sort of stuff. And that's inspirational.
What about away from work? We touched on this earlier with rowing machines, didn't we? Rowing, but what do you do to unwind, relax?
So I have a farm. My wife, again, another inspirational person, because she runs the farm and does a number of other things as well as on top of that. But yeah, we have a farm, and basically I'm a farm hand. And that, so you go from having technical conversations to, mucking out the pigs, feeding the goats, whatever, and chopping the logs. It really is as straightforward as that. But
there's something about being outside, working with your hands and applying yourself physically when you're the flip of the complex intellectual challenges that you're wrestling with, solving. The contrast.
There's the juxtaposition between the two things is something Helen and I talked. This is quite early on in the WDS experience. We moved to we had one smaller farm. We went and this is a bigger one, but we had that conversation where we're thinking, well, how do what does life need to this whole work-life balance is a really difficult thing for me to get right, and I haven't got it right, as Helen would tell you. I'm not sure I can get it right.
I don't know that there is an answer to that for anybody, actually, because it's a uniquely personal thing.
Yeah,
you couldn't draw up a Well, actually, that's a broad sweeping statement. I'm sure there may be some experts that would tell us otherwise, but my sense is you couldn't draw a one-size-fits-all work-life balance plan.
I don't think you can, because mentally it's really important for me to do what I am doing. I can't stop looking at things as if they're a problem. That's just what happens. And then I get very frustrated if I think I can help solve the problem that I'm seeing and I'm not given the opportunity to do that. At the same time, it's really nice just to go and shift a bale of hay or go around the tractor on the fields, because invariably that's where things come to you anyway. When you're not thinking about them, everyone knows that.
But I don't think it strikes me that once upon a time we placed great stock in thinking. We had philosophers who got statues, that we now. Whereas now, if we place value, full of generalizations today, but we place value on doing. Right, so how many times have you been, I don't know, reading a book and someone said, "Oh, can you just go and do this for me?" "Oh, well, you're not doing anything."
Yeah,
well, I'm reading a book. Yeah, but you're not doing anything. It's like, we live in this world where we put the worth in the doing, but actually the thinking. I was listening to a podcast again. It was the same podcast this morning. It was an author talking about he gets up, he's got an office or a workshop at home. He gets up about 5 a.m. He's at his desk at 6 o'clock and he writes from 6 or 7 until 11 or 12 every day when he's a really successful author. But then he stops. He doesn't write in the afternoon. He stops his writing at midday. But he said invariably then I spend the rest of the day thinking about plot lines or twists or turns or character traits or whatever. So that never stops. He said many a time, perhaps even, he said, being present is a real issue for me. If I'm at a family meeting, I'll have a thought about something. So I have to keep a pad with me everywhere. So although I'm not physically sat at my desktop tapping away, I'm still applying a huge amount of brain power into the outcome of my novel.
Yeah.
I think we don't place the same degree of virtue on that once we did.
Yeah.
We place that virtue and you're not doing anything, you're just thinking.
Yeah, and again, coming back to society, as you say at the moment, does talk about mental health a lot and people burning out and so on, and specifically, actually, interestingly, in the music industry, which is where this other thing is, one of the other businesses that I'm involved in, Open Stage, and they. I've been opened up to this fact that the artists themselves feel the need to be communicating to their fan group through social media the whole time, as well as performing, as well as doing the other things. And if they're not visible, then they're going to be forgotten about in some way, and their star burns less brightly, and so on. And so they're in this pressure cooker of always having to do something. And you think, that's not right. How are you going to create if you're always
and to your point,
always on?
It's almost back to what we're saying. The way now we have an immediacy of expectations. Everything is always now. So once upon a time, and I love my music, but you'd go from artist release album, and you might wait a year or 2 years or 3 years for the next album. Yeah. But that's how they'd be judged, not how many followers they had on their social media feed.
Yeah.
So actually that makes me sound like those back in the day stories. But that's the reality of it, the expectation. So it must be incredibly hard to then be creative when you're always on. So you never get that chance to go and, we're going to dive away in a studio for 6 months and think about what our next album's going to look like, because, you need to be releasing something now because people will have forgotten about you in 6 months. Yeah. It's like 15 minutes. Everyone's getting their 15 minutes of fame every 15 minutes.
Because I think that is the pressure. Well, I know that's the pressure. Certainly on the newer artists that are coming through, the newer creatives, and they have their first success, or whatever that is, at whatever level that is as well. And then there's the pressure, to your point, if you're not doing something again and then again and again, then people forget about you. And actually, the more established artists are not under necessarily that same pressure, right? Because people always know Coldplay and they'll go, or U2 or whatever it is, they're Rolling Stones, etc. But I'd love to see the evidence that says, actually, isn't just the quality of what you're doing that makes the difference. So if I am you're just onto the scene, and I keep burning the candle, if you like, at both ends, and therefore the quality of what I do drops, erodes away because I'm just burning out in essence. I don't see that that doesn't lead to longevity, does it? It can't do. So actually the quality of what you produce is the key thing here, not how many times you're communicating to your fan base or to your customers or whatever. It's whether what you do counts. And if it does, you'll be successful. If it doesn't, it won't.
I think you're right.
I don't have any report to back that statement up, but I get that sense that when you talk to people, certainly in the music industry, there's a lot of pressure on these people. And you just think, and it's easy to say and hard to do. I'm not in the music industry, so it's easy for me to say, just take your time, make sure the next one's as good as the last one. And now, if that takes you a year, 2 years, so be it. But if it is good, people will like it.
So what does the future look like for you, David?
For me, it's going to be. I'm never going to stop. I thought when we sold the WDS, and I've sold another business since as well, and I thought, well, okay. What I'll do is I'll go around consulting and tell people how success is achieved. That's just nonsense. I realised that very quickly. Two things. One is every story is different, and I'm definitely not a consultant. Those are the two things I realised. I can't advise in that very well in that capacity. So I have to be involved in stuff. If I'm lucky enough to start another business, if Daisy's successful, obviously that's my main focus at the moment, and helping the guys at Open Stage achieve their objectives. Hopefully both of them successful. I'll still do something else, and I'll do something else. It's just the way, I don't want to be in a position where I'm not doing something, and I get frustrated with people if the world happens to them and they don't move and don't take control of their circumstances. And I think that the way that I do that, the way I'm wired, is to help, to look at problems, try and solve them. If that means it becomes a business, so be it. If it's just solving a problem, then that's it. And that's what I think I'll carry on doing. I can't see that changes. I'd like to do more on the farm. I'd like that, but in reality, and this probably means I'm not going to share this podcast with my wife, I just don't think that's going to happen. I'll do the shifting when she requires me to do it, but I can't see myself taking a 9-to-5 job on the farm. But yeah.
Looking back, what always a question I like to ask on Extrology. What advice might you give 21-year-old David Ffoulkes-Jones?
So, would I do anything differently? Probably not. If I could do things, though, knowing that time is there's a lot of time, and time is on your side. When you're young, time is on your side. Don't confuse that with sit around and do nothing. Go out and experience, and keep experiencing until you find something you're passionate in. I, as it happened, did that, but I might have actually, there are things that my middle sister didn't get A-levels. She went straight into secretarial work, and then she went and travelled around the world and all the rest of that sort of stuff. And she lives in Australia now. But what she did at the age of 20-ish, she decided actually I wanted to be a physiotherapist. And in my mind, that's something that young people should understand is, if you look at my career, I started in WDS 96-ish, sold it in 2012. Let's say that's 16 years. So my career outside of WDS will be longer and more varied than the thing that I was totally immersed in for what I felt like at the time was all of my life. And the reality, that's just not the case. There's time to experience and do things, and all I would advise any young person is just make sure that when you do settle into something, that it's something you passionately care about. I know that's a bit glib, but if you are passionate about it, you'll be successful in it. It's really that simple. Don't stand still. Don't miss. As I said, the fact that you've got time, it does run away. Don't stand still. Learn, move forward. But, there's enough time to do whatever it is you want to do.
Absolutely. It's good advice. And where can people go to find out more about, say, Daizy, for example, and the other ventures that you're involved in?
Yeah, so, Daizy is daizy.io, and that's Daizy with a Z.
Yeah.
And that's the IoT business. That's the Internet of Things stuff that I'm involved in. And then Open Stage is openstage.live. and that's direct artist to fan engagement platform, which is changing the way that artists take their music to fans, which I think is a fantastic thing. I wish I could tell you more about the music industry. I'm just not that person. But I think what they're doing there is superb, and the technology that we've got behind it now really does a fantastic job at making that marketplace far more efficient and effective. It works for both the artist and the fan, so it's very exciting as well.
Fantastic. David, it's been a pleasure to speak with you this afternoon. I really appreciate it.
It's been great being here.
Great insight, great story, really thought-provoking. I think the thing that always appeals to me is that whenever I have discussions around technology, that we've clearly gotten, human race has challenges. We've always had challenges, but that the human endeavor, the intellect, the capability, the creativity, I find fascinating. It's phenomenal. It's absolutely phenomenal. And if I look at the technological advancements in my time on this planet, and in the grand scheme of things, it's a really short period of time that any of us are really here. It's incredible. And I think that makes me really excited about what the future might bring. It doesn't mean that those challenges will persist, but I think I'm really excited by the future. And to be involved in it to the extent that you clearly have and continue to be must be
well. The potential
really
is there, isn't it?
Huge potential.
Huge potential. It's whether we'll
realise it. Absolutely. Of that, I'm convinced.
Whether we get the frameworks right to execute. But it's massive potential. Yeah.
Fantastic. David, really appreciate your time. Great to have you on as our guest. Thanks very much, and look forward to watching you continue to flourish.
Thanks, Lee.
Brilliant. Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for listening to today's Extrology podcast. I really appreciate your audience and ears. If you've enjoyed it, then why not hop onto iTunes and give us a review? I'd really appreciate anything that you might have to say. Any feedback always gratefully received, and look forward to hosting you next time. See you soon. Just a reminder, today's podcast is brought to you by Progresso Talent Partners. Visit www.progressotalent.com today for more information.